Welcome back. It is time to get with our first panel discussion of the afternoon. Thank you all for coming. You are in the Balsal Berlin room, the happiest place at CloudFest. You agree? Yes, I thought so. All right, so for our panel today, it's going to be an interesting one. The panel is titled, Is Blockchain Public Cloud 2.0? Well, we all know that blockchain's a little bit more than just cryptocurrency, so let's see what our panelists have to say. So please join me in welcoming our panelists for today, Christian Dawson, Lukas Hertig, and Avesta Hojjati. Please, gentlemen, welcome me on stage.
Fantastic, and actually I am just our humble moderator for today, and I'm going to try and coax expertise out of Avesta and Lukas here, who are going to share their expertise on what the opportunities really are in the blockchain. Blockchain does have the capabilities to usher in new layers of trust, but we're going to see if it's maybe too early to tell just how much transformation of the public cloud is going to ultimately take place. So we're going to explore what the future has in store for decentralized blockchain hyperscalers, and whether you're a newcomer to decentralized networks or you just want to hear about the latest blockchain developments, this session's for you. First, I want to take a quick poll of the audience and find out how many people are actually deploying blockchain solutions or working on them in their R&D departments within their own organization. Okay. Second question is, are there any women who are working for companies who are doing that? I'm helping host a diversity in tech mixer tonight at 4, and I wanted to see if there was anybody who was willing to come up on stage who had some experience, just so we can get more diversity in this panel. It's okay. It's okay. We'll go ahead and we'll get started. Thank you guys for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So I guess my first question is blockchain on your radar today? If so, where are you? Where's your company with it right now? Why don't we start with you, Lukas?
I would say we have done first steps in that direction because we believe it's important for the future.
Yeah.
So with maybe I give a bit of background. Plesk.
Sure. Let's explain what Plesk is and what its role is.
Everyone knows Plesk, I guess, and cPanel. So we're all separate companies, but still in the same holding now. So about a year ago, I started looking into what could be the opportunity for Plesk, but also for service providers.
Great.
And we can talk about that in probably more detail, but one thing that we looked at is, for example, decentralized storage. We have a partnership with a company called Storj, or Store with a J. Some people call it Storage. The CEO actually right now is Ben Golub, the former CEO of Docker.
Okay.
They have 43 million investment, and they're building a decentralized storage that is Amazon S3 compatible. They are in a beta mode, and we have integrated them into Plesk as a beta right now, so that you could back up your server or website into the decentralized storage, or you could contribute remaining hard disk space into that blockchain network, because Plesk is like everywhere with 800,000 servers. They're like super decentralized. So that's like our first project on where we will go actively into that space. It's not only blockchain, but it's also decentralized storage. So it's kind of a hybrid between decentralization and blockchain, but it's also decentralized in the end.
That is really cool.
Yes.
And you were telling me backstage that you're also advising another blockchain-related company, is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's personally, yes. It's a spin-off of Acronis, who is also a sponsor here.
Nice.
It's called ChainStack. Actually, I'm having the T-shirt here from ChainStack. You could call it like a Plesk for enterprise and permission blockchains, because right now it's a big hustle to deploy enterprise blockchains like Hyperledger. I think Brian is here to speak probably later, or did already, I'm not sure. So to automate the deployment of Hyperledger, of Corda, of Ethereum and other enterprise permission blockchains, to automate the creation of consortiums, and to automate and give a GUI to consensus mechanisms, and deploy that in a multi-cloud fashion towards Amazon, Azure, DigitalOcean, Google, and so on. Yeah, and
That's
because
great.
I'm 15 years in Plesk, so, and parallels and automation, so I have some background in that space.
That's
I
great.
believe.
You're in it. You're in it, and you probably are seeing what the opportunities are for the people in this room. That's great. And yourself, can you tell us a little bit about your company, your background, and then
Sure.
what you're doing in blockchain now?
So I'm the head of R&D at DigiCert, and I think to answer your first question, are we working on anything related to blockchain? Strongly, I can say we are the only certificate authority who has very strong presence in blockchain in multi-dimension form.
That's great.
You mentioned Hyperledger. We are part of Hyperledger. We're actually the first and only CA that joined Hyperledger. Hyperledger is a permissioned blockchain implementation that allows you to do a number of different things, specifically for your enterprises. We are a part of Sovereign Foundation, which is distributed identity on blockchain, which utilizes Hyperledger ND, which is yet another platform from Hyperledger. So what specifically DigiCert does in this area could be divided in three different portions. One is we are heavily invested in actual research and development for blockchain. Okay. Specifically, we are working on consensus protocols for blockchain. So this, just to give a 30 seconds elevator's pitch of what consensus is, every blockchain implementation requires an agreement for the next value that is going to be added to the chain, right? Okay. So blockchain is an append, meaning that is as a write only, and every time that you're going to change something, you have to create a new chain. What we're working at DigiCert is coming up with a scheduler of some sense that chooses the best consensus protocol for your enterprise. This is still under R&D, so there's no product ready for that. Another portion of this is we are working on blockchain as a service. We talk about blockchain, everybody's interested about blockchain, but who's actually going to spend the time to learn about blockchain and implement it, right? So the idea is to provide that API to end users with a proper data structure and ask them that if you believe your use case is the right one, contact DigiCert, here's the API, here's a blockchain backend, and you're able to distribute your application on that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm really interested to find out, because you guys are doing things in this blockchain space, is whether the decisions to invest time and resources into those solutions, whether they're consumer-driven, whether they're things that the customer's asking for, or are you guys being future-focused in your decision to implement these things?
Sure. So I think innovation needs to be a DNA portion for every company, right? If you're only solving the problems that are existing today, you're just running in your place and not looking for the future. So what we're trying to do at DigiCert is looking forward for our customers. Mm-hmm. As a customer, you need to be focused on your own product. You need to focus on your own problems. And when there's a problem, you need to look for a solution that is easy to deploy. Yeah. So that's what we have been doing. We have DigiCert labs that we do have individuals dedicated to blockchain specifically. Mm-hmm. They're researching it. They're finding out the best way that customers are able to integrate. And obviously, we receive inputs from customers as well. If there's a specific type of blockchain implementation that they require, let's say they would like to have a hybrid blockchain, meaning that it's permission and it's permissionless. You need to have some sense of authentication to some extent. At the same time, you would like to have your users to be able to use it. Mm-hmm. That's a hybrid model. So we are looking at those models to provide a flexible authentication model for those customers as well.
Great. And are people begging to have Plesk do things on the blockchain?
Well, I would say it's definitely future-focused, yes. Yeah. I think the key thing is not every problem should be tried to be solved with blockchain just because blockchain is hype. There's a lot of use cases where there is no need for a blockchain. Yeah. But on the other side, you know, sounds maybe a bit funny. I'm from Switzerland. We have this crypto valley that we created around Zug. I always say blockchain is the digital version of the direct democracy model that we have in Switzerland because it works exactly the same or more or less the same, like depending on the consensus mechanism that you use, but it goes in that direction. And that makes me excited, and I think it's also a thing of the decentralized approach. You know, right now, even though I'm heavily supporting Amazon, Microsoft, Google, DigitalOcean, and all our engagements there with Plesk, and we are growing like crazy there. They're also creating, to a certain extent, alarm risk because everything is running on Amazon today.
Sure.
You know that they're having, like, when you look at the graphs on which infrastructure hosters are running the biggest amount of web-facing servers. You have the hosters who are kind of getting flat or losing, and in the middle it's DigitalOcean, and then it's AWS with 1 point something million servers. And I think there is a reason to look into blockchain and decentralized architectures to give a bit more balance again, potentially in that space as well. That's why you do have the title of is it Public Cloud 2.0. I mean, there are companies working on kind of the next version of decentralized computing architectures. It's very difficult. I mean, Sonem or Dfinity and others. I think that's for us also like to look into how to bring more balance again. I think, but that's more a long-term future because this is not going to change very, very quickly.
Yeah, I understand that.
So yeah.
You started to get into why this industry should care about blockchain, and I want to throw that back to you to have an opportunity to add to that with maybe this one frame. You mentioned that you have DigiCert Labs. What we're talking about here is a future-forward technology, but there are a number of them that you could be investing time into, such as AI or IoT. What specifically is interesting you about blockchain?
Good question. So think about security as a toolbox. You have your flat screwdriver, you have your Phillips head screwdriver, you have wrenches, all different type of tools in there. If you choose the wrong tool for the wrong job, you're going to waste your time and probably you're going to destroy that, whatever you were going to fix. So mentioning AI and IoT and blockchain, I think is very important to do your due diligence before actually picking up that technology to solve something. At DigiCert, we are looking at AI, we are looking at machine learning heavily, and obviously we are invested in IoT as well. And what we have seen is investing about 40% of time and power to look at that use case and see if blockchain is the right one for it.
Okay.
Right? So if you have something like a distributed system, for example, you mentioned Amazon, for example, as a distributed model. So blockchain is a distributed platform by itself. And consider that you're putting this distributed system entirely on Amazon, on one single region. If that region comes down and is not accessible anymore, then what have you done with blockchain? Right? So again, comes down to looking and asking all those questions before doing that deployment. And again, that's something that DigiCert is, I would say I'm quite proud of because we ask those questions before even putting a dollar sign of the solution, right? If it's not right for you, we can think about another problem that blockchain could be a solution to instead of the one that you've chosen.
That's really interesting. In a lot of ways, for me, the story of the web hosting industry, this was web hosting focused before it broadened to be cloud focused, right? And the story of that was really the story of moving things off-premise, right? Towards this move away from centralization of being on-prem into a hosting environment and then a cloud environment. Is this a natural next iteration that takes you further towards decentralization?
I think the hybrid model is something that we have to look at, right? So one example of this is we are working on this project right now that allows you to deploy a couple of your nodes as a distributed model, let's say for Hyperledger, on AWS, on DigitalOcean, or any hosting environment, matter of fact.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you could have other ledgers or the nodes that are hosted by you and somebody that you trust. So if the cloud goes down, or if you go down, you still do have access to that data from somewhere, right? So again, I think that hybrid model, which is the sweet spot between being on the cloud and being off cloud, is something that users and customers have to look into.
Okay, let's talk about looking into it then. People come to this conference because they're serious about the cloud, right? These are all people here who are running businesses, who are operating businesses. They come here to figure out what the next opportunity is. You spent some time looking into what real opportunities are for the people in this.
Yeah, so as we are working with the service provider channel since many, many years, we're obviously also looking at that from an angle like what are the opportunities from a service provider channel? And on one side with ChainStack that I'm advising right now, but also I wrote a blog post with about 8 pages that lists all the different opportunities for service providers, and there are actually opportunities for service providers in that space as well. So you talked about Hyperledger. I think especially projects that are for permission blockchains means basically when you compare it to a Bitcoin or to an Ethereum, they're like global decentralized blockchains that are public. so everyone can access it. But in the enterprise and permission blockchain space, you need, let's say an example would be different stakeholders in a logistics chain or a value chain, where you need to do tracking. It's super complicated today. Everyone has its own implementation of SAP somehow. Some of them are competitors. They need to share some data, if you want to, some people always give this example of bringing a flower from Amsterdam to South Africa by boat takes minimum 27 stakeholders who deal with some kind of paperwork. If you can let these people access a closed environment, a secure environment where they share data without exposing themselves, because some of them might be competitors, for example, or certain security is required because some stakeholder might be customs. There are a lot of opportunities to actually deploy such architectures for so-called consortiums, because what you would basically do is you create a consortium of different stakeholders in certain area. It can also be 5 different insurances who need to share certain data. I mean, in Switzerland, all this stuff is actually already happening in implementation right now. Where, just an example, I mean, one of the leading companies as a service provider in that space is actually also from Switzerland. It's Swisscom Blockchain. When you ask them what is like the minimal infrastructure you need to deploy a blockchain, it can be also, you said, hybrid. I would call it multi-cloud also, or it should be multi-cloud, but the basic architecture starts with like 27 machines, and it's like $500,000 a year. So, and this is just a small implementation for an enterprise blockchain or for a permission blockchain. And there's a lot of opportunities there to provide the infrastructure, to provide all the managed services, because all the hosting companies today are moving into managed service providers or become managed service providers, similar like all the other channel partners in the IT do. There's a lot of opportunities there. Then you have, as I mentioned already, the decentralized storage approach. Then there are some more funny opportunities, for example, master nodes. Not sure, has anyone ever heard about master nodes? So master nodes is an interesting thing. So there are certain cryptocurrencies where you can buy yourselves into becoming a kind of, it's called master node, to run the actual network. And so you have a different implementation than just a wallet or a client that you would usually have with Bitcoin or Ethereum on your desktop, but you would have like I will not go into technical details, probably you know better about it, but you would have an advanced infrastructure version that you would help running that network. And there are master nodes for Dash as a cryptocurrency. There are other master nodes where you pay between, the smallest one start at like $1,000, but it can, I think Dash was at some point over $200,000 to run one node. And then you get a good amount of the transaction fees that are happening within that network paid back. And this is obviously it's kind of more like an investment opportunity for a service provider.
Got it.
So that's another example. Then obviously all the managed services space to help end customers building such kind of infrastructures, solving real problems. As you say, not everything should be used for blockchain. If anyone wants to actually find out if his problem can be solved by blockchain, there's a very good website. It's called doyouneedablockchain.com. And actually in 90% of the cases, the answer is no, not yes. But there are plenty of opportunities where you need managed services, where you need to educate end customers. I talked with one service provider partner that we have in France, and I said, "Are you having any requests for blockchain-based things?" And he said, "Yeah, he has between 5 and 10 requests a week, but the customer doesn't know what he is asking for, and he has nothing to offer them." So I think we really need to work out these different use cases in that space and educate the market on how this can be a new opportunity, because it's definitely more complicated than web hosting. It's not something that you just sell online. Maybe with ChainStack one day, where you have an automation tool to automate all these processes, then probably yes. But there are tons of opportunities there to help implementing these exciting opportunities that blockchain creates using the service provider channel.
That's great, and I want to pause for a second because I also want your take on what the market opportunities are in this space. But you mentioned that this can be way more complicated than hosting, And so I want to ask you both something that, intuitively I might have asked at the beginning, but I figured let's let people hear that there are market opportunities so their ears perk up before we try to explain it. How do you explain blockchain to people who only know it from their cryptocurrency?
I usually start this with, let me explain blockchain to my grandma.
Great.
Right?
Let's do it.
My grandmother, she has 4 grandchildren, right? And whenever it comes to distributing money, she needs to distribute it equally to everyone, right? But how would other kids know that everybody got the equal amount? Unless in front of everybody, she will show it to them, right? But being me, I usually will try to get the money from other ones, so I try to exchange them with, let's say, candy, because they're younger, right? So I need to have some type of proof that nobody has moved anything between different kids and everybody has received the same one, right? So this idea of ledger comes in. Ledger is actually nothing new. It existed about 2,500 years ago. And the idea was that the central government will send somebody to different estates, ask them how much money that head of a state has made. They come back on this paper and they keep rotating it. The problem was the agreement of adding a new value to that ledger. And it's the same idea that if I give a piece of paper to other grandchilds of my grandma, I need to make sure that the value has never changed. So grandmother is in charge of knowing that every time somebody is going to add new value in there, she's present. That's where the consensus protocol comes in. Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009 came up with the paper for Bitcoin, and among a number of different elements that he introduced, the biggest introduction was this proof of work. Show me that you have done the work, then I will allow you to add a new value, right? So the simple description of this is when people are comparing blockchain to only be Bitcoin, is think about you have to do something before you're able to add a new value to this distributed ledger, right? And that's consensus in simple words.
Great. And so when we apply that to the things Lukas has been talking about the opportunities that exist in this service provider and channel space, is there anything that you want to add to link this concept, this ledger concept, to the things that we were talking about?
I would say what you just explained is the basics that everyone has to know. I mean, if you want to offer solutions in that space, you need to know how that works, and you need to be able to tell the customer if he needs a blockchain-based solution or not. Because as I said, in many cases you don't need one, you can just provide a database.
Right. And another thing, I think adding to that is security portion of it, right? Yeah. We're talking about distributed data.
Right.
We are in Europe. We have to talk about GDPR, right?
Yeah.
It's massive when you're talking about blockchain and you're saying, oh, don't worry about it. I grab your data, I distribute it to Germany and Italy, and then where's my data, right? If I'm going to remove that data, should I go to Germany or should I go to Italy or could I go to the platform holder? So, and you mentioned the flower scenario, so there's a number of different elements that blockchain is missing right now, specifically when it comes to privacy-preserving technologies, right? I don't want to know who my competitor is, or I don't want the competitor to know that the price that I put on this bidding is X amount. That is not really solved on every single blockchain platform. And if you are a service provider and you're giving this platform out to your users, next thing you want to know is that every single price that the customer was using has been exposed to this entire platform and everybody knows about it. Right?
And you don't want to put any personally identifiable information, PII, onto a ledger for everybody to see.
Even if it's a permissioned blockchain, still you don't want to do that, right? Because again, who owns the data? The platform owns or the user owns it. This tool that you have in your toolbox needs to be crafted for a specific use case. And I think as a service provider, the biggest thing that you need to understand is how blockchain works end to end, and then identifying how the use case is going to apply to that. And if you have both of these covered, then you should be safe to actually be a good service provider for that solution.
But correct me if I'm wrong, let's talk about privacy right now, because it may not be that the use cases are there to address the needs of a privacy environment like Europe right now under GDPR, but it seems to me as though the ability to sort of track chain of custody is there. It just needs to be uncovered by innovative people who are looking to find ways to monetize this technology.
In 2010, it was a website known as Silk Road in the United States. So Silk Road was residing on dark web, which, for sake of understanding, is number of web servers running on Tor, accessible by Tor, and they have weird addresses. What Silk Road was doing was able to sell drugs online, and then you're able to receive those drugs, let's say cocaine, in your mailbox. What currency did they use for that? They used Bitcoin. Why? Because everybody will be anonymous who was part of Bitcoin. 2 years later, FBI was able to actually compromise this website because they were able to trace this chain of custody. Okay. That is a use case specifically when it comes to privacy. Not every single currency or blockchain platform is going to private or protect your privacy. Let's change the scenario and think about your EHRs, electronic health records.
Yeah.
If you're putting your EHRs on a blockchain and then I'm able to trace it back the same way that FBI did, does it mean I'm going to compromise your privacy? Well, simply yes, right? So again, there are a number of elements that are missing from a proper blockchain implementation that we need to get there. We are not there yet.
Okay, great. I didn't finish getting your answer to what market opportunities there are for a community like this in blockchain.
Training is big, as you mentioned. I think being a hosting provider, that is massive by itself, right? Amazon is a go-to for many of users, but there are country-specific providers that are needed, right? Depending on the use case and the blockchain platform that you're using, I think there's a hosting provider that could take that use case and say, look, I have Hyperledger Fabric as my service. This is how I bring it up. This is how you're able to use it. And this is how I'm able to actually scale it. Instead of having 27 peers or nodes required, I'm going to put it on 4 or 5, and that's enough for your use case. So.
Got it. Great. Now,
I think maybe to add to this, I mean, I'm talking since years about how the cloud has changed the hosting industry and the IT. And I think blockchain opportunities are yet another opportunity for service providers to finally change and become a managed service provider. I mean, every hosting provider that comes every year to the CloudFest and tells me I'm competing to Amazon, I think doesn't understand economies of scale. And I'm so tired of this discussion. And I think there are every year or every time new opportunities, and I think blockchain is another one, where you can say, okay, I need to focus on a niche, or I need to focus on a certain vertical, or focus on solving problems instead of just selling accounts, shared hosting accounts and VPS hosting accounts. It's a huge issue. People don't believe me still, and it's like 10 years that I'm talking about it. And I think blockchain is another opportunity to look into it, learn from it, solve real problems, offer managed services around it, and probably you can actually, because it's so complicated, you can probably charge a premium and make better profits as a hosting provider than if you just offer monitoring or security services based on your hosting services as a managed service. So I think this is just yet another opportunity to grab those who still believe they sell shared hosting and VPS over the next 10 years. They may miss another large opportunity in that space. That's my opinion, but
that's great.
I cannot stop talking about it because people are still coming with strange things to me every day.
Well, it sounds like the strange thing is them not coming off of the old models, right? Is them being stuck on old models and not looking at how these new technologies are going to fuel the next generation of opportunities that are out there. You're right, that is strange. But we're going to try and work on this crowd and try to make sure that they see those opportunities. Let's maybe for a moment talk about different aspects of the internet infrastructure ecosystem that we're all part of and see if we can uncover some of those opportunities at different levels. So when I take a look at sort of the work that was implemented with the whole Bitcoin, saw a change where, like, all of a sudden blockchain was slicing up the processing power and scattering it all over the globe. So it was no longer centralized into a data center, but it was sort of everywhere, the power that was running this. And so people here know data centers. Is blockchain a threat to data centers? Is it an opportunity for data centers?
I'm going to actually give this to Luca because he talked about distributed storage, right? So if you go back many years, what was the reason that people would go to hosting companies, right? I need to have a website. I'm going to have a virtual private server that requires a dedicated IP address. I need to have Plesk that helps me manage that, right? And I don't have none of those expertise to do
And
that.
I need fast internet access for that server.
Here we go. Yeah, you need to have a 10 gigabytes. That's right. That's right. So when you mentioned the storage, that's a portion of that, right? I do have a storage on my computer. I have SSD that is 500 gigabytes, and I only use 20 gigabytes of that. Am I able to use this storage to actually make money off of it? Well, yes, there's a distributed model that allows you to use that storage. It's fast. You already have fast internet. So I wouldn't say blockchain by itself is going to be a threat. It's going to be a threat if hosting companies aren't thinking forward of how to prepare for blockchain and applications such as blockchain. If you're only going to provide the IP address and VPS and fast internet, then there's no difference between you and somebody else who has ADSL at their home and still they're receiving dedicated IP and running their web servers on a Raspberry Pi.
Everyone can do that.
Yeah. Right.
Also Amazon and DigiCert, like Google and everyone else does that thing. I think we need to go a level up. It goes back to what I said, become a managed service provider, find your niche. I mean, it's, when you look at you mentioned, is it a threat? So I think it's a threat for those who don't get it finally. That, I think you can implement blockchain use. Many hosting companies, they're operating in 1 or 2 countries. Since there is consolidation in the market, since many years, there are kind of consolidated hosters that are kind of operating multi-country with multiple data centers, but many are not. So there are use cases that you can operate locally. But it's another thing that when I said become a managed service provider, solve real problems, you need to go multi-cloud, because the cloud, Amazon, hyperscale cloud, what is one of my passions, they offer you scale globally, into every country. And at one point, I mean, right now, when you go to the top 4 or 5 companies, they in that space, they have over 100 countries and regions and data centers that they offer, with about 150 plus availability zones within these 100 plus regions. And this will not stop. They are building data centers everywhere in every country. So it is a threat if you are not changing your business anyway. If you're able to go in that direction and learn that there is more profit, new profits being done on the higher level of the stack and not with data centers, you can actually profit from it, and you can potentially find a lot of opportunities. But you need to think multi-cloud or hybrid, like you said, and not say, I have this data center here, I'm competing against Amazon. If you're thinking that, you're already wrong, and you will also get blockchain wrong and probably not benefit from the opportunity, and then it's a threat. If you get it right, say, okay, managed services, multi-cloud infrastructure, I don't care, it's about the higher level of services that I need to provide, you will get it right, and there is an opportunity.
Let me frame out a similar question, but focused on the traditional hosting market, which I was a part of, and you've addressed some of it, but I want to drill deeper. I ran a web hosting company for a number of years, going back like 20 years ago. And at the time we were focused, again, this is the old school, our focus was uptime, right? How many nines of uptime and availability can we get for our servers? And you've got this thing and you want to keep it up all the time. Moving into a multi-cloud type environment, all of a sudden you're building for failure and getting to the point where that's far less of a concern. Is blockchain taking us one further level to where uptime really doesn't matter if you architect systems right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit. Probably you technically know it better than I do. I would say blockchain is often discussed together with decentralization. And there is the question like, what does decentralization actually mean? And how decentralized is it really? Because when you look at Bitcoin, I understand it's like 1 or 2 companies dominating 2/3 of the mining in terms of technology. Really? Is that decentralized? And this is the case in many large public blockchains, that it's some kind of a decentralization. There's blockchain experts, probably like you are, that say permissioned and enterprise blockchains shouldn't be done because it's not decentralized as blockchain was meant to be. On the other side, I say permissioned enterprise blockchains is something where you can provide something innovative and solve problems in a better way for enterprises, even if it's closed. So I would say it's also related to decentralization, yes or no, and how much is actually required for a certain use case, and how much decentralization maybe is not even needed. So, but you could still use the blockchain.
That's fair.
Right, I mean, you mentioned the threat for web hosting companies. So I used to be a pen tester back in the day, right? SLA was important, but what was important, another portion of it is you're running an Apache web server, and then there's a 0-day, and you have 10,000 host names that are running on that Apache web server, and this hacker walks in utilizing an RCE, and your entire server is down, right?
Sure.
What would you do? If you had a backup server, you will just plug your new hard disk in there, and everything is up and running. If you didn't have backup, you will call that customer and say, I'm sorry, your website is completely gone, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to blockchain, we have to think about those scenarios, but a little bit differently, right? Are we going to distribute everything on Amazon, and then when Amazon is down, my entire distributed system is down? Or am I going to use a web hosting provider who allows me to hold one of my own nodes that I already trust because it's mine, and then they're holding, let's say, 2 or 3 different nodes in a couple of different regions, right? Am I going to see what type of data structure the blockchain provides for me that is not going to take any PII, therefore I'm compliant with whatever data that I'm taking? So when it comes to blockchain, I think the questions are a little bit different, right? Again, comes down to your due diligence. What are you going to decentralize, right? Are you trusting the data that you're decentralizing? And if one of the nodes becomes a malicious node, which in blockchain we call it honest but curious, right? Because we trust you, but I really don't know if you're going to play a game or no. Then you're taking the data, you're decrypting it, and identify what it is. So the questions are a little bit different. And again, that comes down to service providers to understand the infrastructure and the heart of blockchain.
That is really interesting, and I want to stay on cybersecurity for a minute. I might get a little bit too future forward on this, but is there opportunity for blockchain's ability to distribute information in a secure and immutable and sort of democratic way? Can it lead us to be able to build like unhackable programs and systems, web services?
I think we need to define data and then applications on 2 different sides.
Okay.
So there are technologies such as ZKP, zero knowledge proof. The idea of zero knowledge proof is that I don't need to reveal my identity, but I can prove something. The best use case or the best example of this is imagine in the United States you're going to a bar and you need to show that you're 21 years old. I'll take my ID out, I show it to the door guy. Not he only knows that I'm 21 years old, he knows my name, he knows my address, and a bunch of different information. This happens on blockchain as well. If I distribute the data and I'm only going to guess what your gender is, am I going to guess your age, your address, your name, and a bunch of different information? Well, you need to use zero knowledge proof that provides that technology for receiving a proof without revealing too much. Data is another portion of this. You can use technologies such as MPC or multi-party computation that instead of giving every single node the entire data, you're only giving a portion of that data. Now, if you need it, you need to ask consensus from 3 different nodes to provide their data sets. You're matching it, and now you have access to that entire data. So again, blockchain by itself is evolving as we are speaking and requires different technologies that are going to be added to it. But blockchain is not going to solve your cybersecurity problems.
Okay.
Maybe solve some of them, but not everything.
The last segment of our ecosystem that I sort of wanted to explore through the blockchain lens is the network. And so like I'm interested in finding out whether a distributed ledger system can be used to build transparent networks that have stronger system reliability.
Very good question. So DigiCert is a certificate authority. And as one of the requirements for certificate authority, we need to have an ecosystem of known as CT, or certificate transparency. The idea is a certificate authority will issue a certificate, we will put this log, and everybody are able to look at this log. The underneath technology of this is what is known as Merkle hash tree. Is a binary tree infrastructure that if you're going to change something, you're able to see the entire change, and it's kind of immutable. So when it comes to transparency for blockchain, what you're able to do is you're able to go all the way back, what we call a genesis, which is the first block, and you're able to trace and see what has changed. This is where the transparency part of this comes in. Then we are getting into immutability of that, right? If I'm going to change something, I need to do enough work, but not only that, it needs to be some type of consensus that people agree with my answer. And obviously, the last portion of this is auditability. If it's transparent and I know what type of change has taken place, I'm able to do this audit. You mentioned the keyword network. I think the best use case for this is server logs. As a web hosting provider, I collect all my server logs, I put it on this blockchain, and every single user is able to see it. That might be bad because hackers will access your public logs, and that is not good. Now we're getting into enterprise portion of this.
Sure. So my goal was to try and walk us through the ecosystem in an effort to try and contextualize the opportunities that exist in blockchain in ways that people are familiar. Now that we are getting to the end of our time here, I sort of want to ask you guys each the same question, and it's the question that we pose in the title of the talk. Is blockchain really cloud 2.0? Is it the next logical iteration of computing for this industry?
I think that's a very difficult question because there are some companies that try that. They call themselves fog computing companies. As I mentioned, Sonem, I think they are even a sponsor here, if I'm not completely wrong. Dfinity is one of them. Golem is trying to do that. So there are some that try to build the next Amazon, and they're saying that. But due to the technical architecture of blockchain that is not so fast yet as it should be, it's very difficult to just replace it. I think you could call it the next cloud 2.0, I think in terms of a business opportunity and in terms of a next level of solving problems in a different way or in a better way. I think then you can compare it to the impact of cloud because, as I mentioned, some people still believe they compete to Amazon, but the cloud has unbelievable impact on how we operate in IT today. Even as Plesk, as we are now together with cPanel, people are thinking that we have a monopoly. But the real ways of solving problem, though, to build secure and run your website and application can be done anywhere, in any form, in the cloud. And I think, so blockchain on the problems that it solves in a better way could be, in my opinion, seen like cloud 2.0, but not technically speaking. Rather in terms of the problems, how it solves. That
makes sense to me.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense to me.
I would say blockchain is an opportunity towards Cloud 2.0.
Okay.
Right? Cloud 2.0 by itself is very massive. What is included in Cloud 2.0? Security as a service. You need to have access to public infrastructure, but you don't want to bring it up. Is there any service that is able to do that for you? Well, it is. You need to have access to on-demand hosting that is scalable, that goes from Australia to China to United States. Right? That's yet another opportunity. I need to access to distributed data that is trusted. Well, we call that hyperledger. We call that blockchain. And again, the word cloud 2.0, I think if you distribute it in half a portions, you can go by different quarters and different halves to get to that 2.0. And blockchain just makes a very small dent into that number.
That's excellent. So the last thing I'm going to ask both of you gentlemen to do before we end our session, you've already given us a good case that the people in this room should be focusing their attention on the blockchain and the opportunities that exist there. I want to see if you can give them some how. Like, what should they do if they're interested in blockchain, they want to explore more of it for their business?
labs@digicert.com. We are always happy to chat to you about blockchain. As you can tell, it's one of my favorite topics. So we'll be happy to help there. But obviously, there are sources that you can access online. You could be part of Hyperledger Foundation if you're an organization that gives you access to a number of different members, trainings in regards to Hyperledger. The literature, I think, is the best place. Hyperledger for Dummies will give a good base of understanding how blockchain and enterprise blockchain works. And I would say get your hands dirty. Just go grab some open source blockchain implementation and play with it. You learn programming and you learn how the basics are working.
Is there any public blockchain that you'd recommend going and playing with?
Absolutely, Ethereum, right? You can, if you know JavaScript, Ethereum is one of the best places. You can learn their own language. You can run your own application. I wouldn't say put personal information on there, but still you can run an application. You can purchase some gas. You can distribute the application to virtual private servers, and you can learn how it works.
That's great. That's great. Good lesson.
From our side, I would say chain stack is currently in beta. For those service providers who would be interested, I'm happy to introduce you to them. This solution will not be just software as a service, it will be also on-premise because the end customers requested it already. Instead of deploying Hyperledger by hand, or it can be quite complicated sometimes, it take a lot of time, this will automate the whole deployment for you and you can directly start a level higher and start thinking about the use cases. I can also recommend, go to some of these blockchain centers where companies are coming together. In Switzerland, it's the Crypto Valley in Zug. There are tons of companies there. There are meetups. You can go to Zurich into Trust Square, what is a former bank building that has now, I don't know how many startups that have a desk each in the most expensive street in the Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich. You could go to Singapore, you could go to Malta, you could go up to some of these centers, you could join closed expert groups like Crypto Explorers or Nextblock. If you need any introductions or something, I can do that. You could join local meetups for these topics where people are exchanging ideas, get into it, get your hands dirty, as you say. There are tons of opportunities of working together and getting to the right people. You will meet a lot of people like you who have very deep technical knowledge and who can help you explaining. It's a very welcoming industry. People help each other because nobody knows everything about blockchain, I would say. It's so, about every use case and about every technical function. So get into it, and if you need any help, let me know, yes.
Okay, well, how do people let you know if they're interested in contacting you further?
You can just go to my name on LinkedIn and send me a message there, or you can send me an email at lukas@plesk.com.
Lukas@plesk.com. All right. Or DigiCert Labs.
Labs@digicert.com, or my personal email is Avesta, Avesta, @digicert.com.
So now you've got a couple of resources if you want to get started on this, and a lot of ideas on how you guys can get going. So hopefully this has helped you identify opportunities that you can take away from here and explore. I want to thank our guests very much for sharing their expertise, and for all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.